Well, well, well. Good morning, lovelies and distinguished gentlemen. It's your gal Emily here, ready to add a dash of sparkle to your day with the juiciest updates from the charming world of Witworks. Hope you're soaking up all the good vibes on this splendid day. Now, onto the main event courtesy of the fabulous folks at Gizmo League. These darlings are like the Justice League of tech gadgets and gaming gear. Seriously. They're all about serving up the coolest, most futuristic goodies that'll transport you right into your own sci-fi saga. Let's give them a round of applause, shall we? They're the reason we're all gathered here today after all. And don't forget to check out www.gizmoleague.com after the show for a dive into everything awesome. Now, let's delve into today's most enchanting tale without further ado. Top 10 Peaceful Protests That Ended in Chaos. Introduction. Protests have long been a cornerstone of democratic expression, where people gather to voice their concerns and push for change. However, not all peaceful demonstrations end as intended. Sometimes, despite the best intentions, chaos ensues, turning a peaceful gathering into a tumultuous event. Here, we recount 10 instances where what started as orderly protests took unexpected turns into chaos. 1. March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, 1963. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963 was like a blockbuster summer event, only without the popcorn and overpriced sodas. Picture this, a sea of people, as far as the eye can see, all gathered at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It was a hot August day, but that didn't stop over 250,000 folks from showing up, united by a common cause. They came from all walks of life, ready to demand civil and economic rights, and they did it with style and grace. This wasn't just any ordinary protest. It was the stage for one of the most iconic speeches in history. Enter Martin Luther King Jr., the star of the show. When he stepped up to the podium in front of the Lincoln Memorial, it was as if the air itself was buzzing with anticipation. And then he delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech, a speech so powerful and poetic that it still gives us goosebumps today. If words could paint pictures, MLK's would have created a masterpiece. The event was like a well-orchestrated symphony of voices demanding justice and equality. People sang, they chanted, and they held signs high, each one a testament to their hopes and dreams for a better America. It was a peaceful protest, the kind that shows the best of humanity, determination, solidarity, and a yearning for change. But, like any good drama, there was a bit of tension. In the midst of this peaceful assembly, a small group decided to spice things up by clashing with the police. Now, you might think of them as the unruly extras in an otherwise flawless production. Their scuffle was brief, but enough to cause a minor blemish on the day's events. Think of it as a small coffee stain on an otherwise pristine white shirt. Noticeable, but not enough to ruin the whole outfit. Despite this hiccup, the March on Washington was an undeniable success. It didn't just advocate for civil and economic rights. It showcased the power of peaceful protest and the enduring spirit of the American people. It was a day that would go down in history, remembered for its hope, its unity, and its dream of a better tomorrow. So, the next time you think about the March on Washington, picture that incredible assembly of determined individuals, all standing together in the heat of the summer sun, with MLK's words ringing in their ears. And remember, even the best days have their little imperfections, but it's the big picture that counts. 2. Tiananmen Square protests, 1989. The Tiananmen Square protests of '89, a turbulent chapter in modern history that started with students raising their voices for political change in China, and boy did things escalate quickly. Picture this, it all kicked off in Beijing's bustling Tiananmen Square, where students, like determined chess players, made their move for political reform. They weren't just playing checkers, they wanted change. But alas, what began as a peaceful gathering akin to a massive outdoor study session complete with banners and passionate speeches, soon turned into a scene straight out of a political thriller. Enter stage left. The Chinese government, not exactly a fan of reform requests, decided to crash the party, literally. Cue the dramatic music as military forces rolled in like uninvited guests to a peaceful potluck. The clash that followed wasn't just a spat over who brought the best potato salad, it was a tragic turning point. Suddenly, what started as a hopeful chorus of demands became a chorus of international outcry. The crackdown was more than just a buzzkill. It was a heartbreaking moment that shook the world. Lives were lost, dreams dashed, and the once promising protest ended up as a cautionary tale in the annals of activism. It's like planning a surprise party only to have the guest of honor show up with a SWAT team. The fallout? Well, let's just say China found itself on the receiving end of some serious side-eye from the global community. Diplomatic relationships hit the rocks faster than a Titanic sequel, and the echoes of Tiananmen Square reverberated far beyond Beijing's borders. It was a reminder that behind the shiny facade of global politics, there are real people with real aspirations, and, sometimes, those aspirations clash louder than a cymbal solo at a rock concert. In the end, the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 weren't just a blip on the historical radar. They were a poignant reminder of the power struggle between authority and the aspirations of a brave few. It's a story that teaches us about the fragility of protest, the weight of government response, and the enduring spirit of those who dare to speak up. So, next time you think of Tiananmen Square, remember it's not just about the square footage. It's about the monumental clash of ideals that shook a nation and left the world pondering the price of change. 3. Seattle WTO protests, 1999. The Seattle WTO protests of '99, a moment in history that was like a mixtape of activism, chaos, and a touch of what just happened. Picture this: Seattle, a city known for its coffee, grunge music, and rain, suddenly finds itself in the spotlight of global trade debates. The World Trade Organization, WTO, rolls into town like a big-shot CEO, but instead of a red carpet, they get a riot. Let's break it down. Activists, ranging from tree huggers to human rights crusaders, flock to Seattle like it's the Woodstock of global trade dissent. Their beef? Fairer trade practices and keeping Mother Earth happy amidst all the economic boom. Most of these folks are as peaceful as a yoga retreat, chanting slogans and waving signs that probably made economists nervous. But every protest has its rebels without a pause. A small chunk of the crowd decides to take things up a notch, or maybe several notches. Cue the clash with police and a sprinkle of vandalism, turning parts of downtown Seattle into a DIY demolition derby. Suddenly, Seattleites are stuck between sipping their lattes and dodging tear gas canisters. The city officials, not expecting this much excitement outside of a Seahawks game, swiftly declare a state of emergency. Traffic jams become an Olympic sport, and businesses start boarding up windows faster than you can say global economic policy. Chaos reigns supreme, like a misplaced umbrella in a Seattle storm. For a few days, Seattle feels less like a tech hub and more like a scene from a dystopian blockbuster. The WTO delegates inside, probably sipping on their double-shot espressos, must have wondered if they accidentally stumbled into an episode of Survivor Activist Edition. Meanwhile, the rest of the world tunes in, trying to figure out if this is a protest or a new age rendition of Sleepless in Seattle. In the aftermath, the Seattle WTO protests left a mark, a reminder that in the land of coffee and consensus building, you can still brew up a protest strong enough to wake the sleepiest of trading giants. It sparked debates, lawsuits, and probably a few conspiracy theories about who forgot to invite whom to the after-party. So, there you have it, a tale of Seattle, WTO, and how a bunch of passionate folks turned a global summit into a spectacle that even Starbucks couldn't brew up. Because in Seattle, when it rains, it pours protests. And sometimes that's how history gets its espresso shot of change. 4. Gezi Park protests, 2013. The Gezi Park protests of 2013, where a park's fate became the catalyst for a national uproar akin to arguing over whose turn it is to mow the lawn. Picture this: Istanbul's Gezi Park, a quaint green sanctuary nestled amidst the hustle and bustle of one of the world's most vibrant cities. Now imagine some officials deciding, hey, you know what would be a great idea? Let's bulldoze this peaceful patch of greenery and build, well, who knows what? Naturally, this didn't sit well with the locals. What started as a save the park kind of protest quickly snowballed into a full-fledged rebellion against what many saw as creeping authoritarianism. Because, you see, in democracy, bulldozers are supposed to clear debris, not dreams. The protests were a bit like a Turkish telenovela: drama, passion, and plenty of twists. Peaceful demonstrators waving banners turned into a sea of dissent against the heavy-handed response of the authorities. Think tear gas, riot police, and more tear gas for good measure. It's like someone misread the protest memo as, "Let's have a tear gas party," instead of, "Let's peacefully discuss urban planning over Turkish tea." Amidst the chaos, though, the Gezi Park protests weren't just about trees and concrete. They became a symbol of people standing up and saying, hey, we care about our public spaces and, democracy. Because nothing says democracy quite like facing down water cannons armed with nothing but a placard and a really strong sense of civic duty. The whole affair was a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments of solidarity, where strangers became comrades in arms, united by a love for parks and a healthy distrust of overzealous construction projects. And let's not forget the international solidarity, because nothing brings the world together like a good old-fashioned protest against turning green spaces into, well, anything else. In the end, Gezi Park didn't just stay put. It became a rallying cry for those advocating for civil liberties and the right to protest peacefully without getting tear-gassed for it. Because if there's one thing the Gezi Park protests taught us, it's that sometimes all it takes is a park bench and a passionate crowd to shake things up and remind everyone that democracy should be about more than just voting. It's about voicing your concerns, even if it means risking a little tear gas for your troubles. 5. Ferguson protests, 2014. The summer of 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. A time that seemed to put the nation under a magnifying glass, highlighting issues that had been simmering for far too long. The catalyst? The tragic shooting of Michael Brown, an 18-year-old African-American, by a white police officer. The incident sparked a wave of protests that washed over the town and quickly spread across the country like wildfire. Folks took to the streets demanding justice for Brown, and calling for an end to the all-too-familiar narrative of police violence against African Americans. Now, while many of these demonstrations were the epitome of peaceful assembly, complete with chants, signs, and a whole lot of passionate speeches, there were moments when things took a turn for the dramatic. Some protests escalated into riots, with looting and clashes with the police becoming the nightly news staple. It was as if the simmering pot of racial tension finally boiled over, and boy, did it spill out everywhere. Picture this: Ferguson became a sort of unintentional stage where America's deep-seated issues with race and policing played out in real time. On one side, you had people standing up, quite literally, for what they believed was a grave injustice. On the other, law enforcement, often decked out in riot gear, trying to maintain order amidst the chaos. It was a scene straight out of a dystopian movie, but with a painfully real and raw edge. Despite the clashes, what was truly remarkable was the sense of unity and determination among the peaceful protesters. They were there for a purpose, carrying the torch for a movement that sought to shed light on the systemic issues plaguing the nation. Their voices echoed through the streets of Ferguson, demanding accountability and reform. In the grand scheme of things, the Ferguson protests were more than just a response to a single incident. They were a stark reminder that the issues of racial inequality and police violence were far from resolved. They forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths and sparked a broader conversation about justice and equality. So, while Ferguson in 2014 might be remembered for the tension and turmoil, it also stands as a testament to the power of community and the relentless pursuit of justice. It showed that even in the face of adversity, people can come together, stand up, and make their voices heard. And that's something worth remembering with a nod and a gentle, knowing smile. 6. Hong Kong Umbrella Movement, 2014. The Hong Kong Umbrella Movement in 2014 was like a huge, dramatic showdown in the heart of Hong Kong. Picture this: thousands of people, armed with nothing but their determination and, quite fittingly, umbrellas, took to the streets to demand democratic reforms and more independence from mainland China. The umbrellas weren't just for the occasional rain shower. They became symbols of resistance, protecting protesters from pepper spray and tear gas used by the police. Initially, it was a pretty peaceful scene. Imagine a massive outdoor sit-in with students, activists, and everyday folks all camping out, debating politics, and dreaming of a more democratic future for Hong Kong. It was almost like a festival, but with a very serious undercurrent. People were passionate, united, and hopeful. They occupied key areas in the city, turning them into makeshift villages, complete with tents, food stalls, and study areas. The energy was electric, and for a moment, it seemed like their voices might just be loud enough to bring about change. But, as with many idealistic movements, things took a turn for the worse. The authorities weren't too thrilled about this massive ongoing protest, so they started cracking down, and the initially peaceful gatherings began to see more and more clashes. The police stepped up their game, using more forceful tactics to try to disperse the crowds. The protesters, in turn, stood their ground, and the atmosphere got tense, sometimes downright scary. The umbrellas, once just a quirky symbol, became essential shields in literal street battles. As the days turned into weeks and then months, the relationship between the protesters and the authorities soured significantly. Trust, if there had been any to start with, eroded completely. The protesters felt betrayed and oppressed, while the authorities saw the movement as a growing threat to order and stability. It became clear that a peaceful resolution was slipping further and further out of reach. In the end, while the umbrella movement didn't achieve its immediate goals, it did leave a lasting impact. It showed the world the spirit and resilience of Hong Kong's people and set the stage for future protests. The movement became a poignant chapter in the ongoing story of Hong Kong's struggle for greater democracy and autonomy. So, while the umbrellas have long since closed, the echoes of that movement are still very much alive in the city today. 7. Dakota Access Pipeline Protests, 2016. The Dakota Access Pipeline saga of 2016, a tale that mixed activism, environmental concerns, and clashes that could rival any dramatic showdown. Picture this: Native American tribes, joined by legions of passionate environmental activists, converging at Standing Rock like a modern-day gathering of the concerned and the determined. At its heart, this was a classic David versus Goliath narrative. On one side, you had the energy behemoths pushing forward with plans for the Dakota Access Pipeline, aiming to carry oil across sacred lands and under crucial water sources. On the other side, native tribes and their allies, armed not with slingshots, but with chants of protest and banners of defiance. Now, maintaining the peace? That turned out to be a bit like juggling porcupines. Tricky and often painful. Despite their best efforts to keep things zen, tensions flared hotter than a summer barbecue. Law enforcement and hired security teams didn't exactly RSVP to the peace party, leading to clashes that got a bit too intimate for comfort. Think arrests, accusations of heavy-handed tactics, and enough courtroom drama to rival a season finale of your favorite legal drama. What emerged from the muddy waters of the Missouri River wasn't just a pipeline debate. It was a national conversation about indigenous rights, environmental stewardship, and the limits of corporate power. Suddenly, "Water is life" became more than a slogan. It was a rallying cry echoing across social media feeds and evening news broadcasts. But amid the chaos and the headline-worthy drama, there were moments of unity and solidarity that could warm the coldest of hearts. Tribes from across the country stood shoulder to shoulder, joined by allies who believed that some things, like sacred lands and clean water, are worth standing up for, even if it means a few nights in the local jail. So, as the dust settled, or rather, the protest tents packed up, the Dakota Access Pipeline protests left an indelible mark. They showed that when people band together, whether in North Dakota or on Twitter, they can make waves that ripple far beyond the banks of the Missouri. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded us all that sometimes, even in the face of giants, a little bit of courage and a whole lot of determination can move mountains, or at least reroute pipelines. 8. Charlottesville. Unite the Right Rally, 2017. All right, buckle up for a journey through one of the less charming chapters of recent American history, Charlottesville, 2017. Picture this, a quaint southern town known for its historic charm suddenly thrust into the spotlight for hosting a clash that made your Thanksgiving dinner debates seem like child's play. So, what was supposed to be a Unite the Right rally, where apparently folks with a questionable affection for white nationalism decided to have a little get-together. You know, the kind of gathering that makes you check your GPS twice just to make sure you haven't taken a wrong turn into 1950s America. But, surprise, surprise, their idea of a fun time didn't sit too well with everyone else. Cue the anti-racist groups who were like, excuse me, but we prefer our weekends without a side of bigotry, thanks. And that's when things went from 0 to, where's the popcorn? Real quick. Tensions boiled over faster than a pot of water left unattended on the stove. Suddenly, it wasn't just a battle of ideologies, but a full-blown street showdown. Think medieval jousting, but instead of horses and lances, you've got shouting matches and picket signs. Oh, and don't forget the occasional tear gas, because nothing says family reunion like a bit of respiratory distress. But the pièce de résistance, the moment that made everyone hit the brakes on their outrage and just stare in horror, was when a car decided to crash the party. Literally. Imagine being so mad you decide to take your four-wheeled frustration out on a crowd of people peacefully exercising their right to not agree with you. It's like road rage meets misguided patriotism, with tragic consequences. In the end, lives were shattered, bodies were broken, and a community was left picking up the pieces of a day that will forever be a scar on their town's history. It was a stark reminder that extremism, in any flavor, is about as welcome as a skunk at a perfume counter. And for the rest of us watching from the sidelines, it was a wake-up call that maybe, just maybe, we need to have a serious chat about how we can disagree without turning Main Street into a battlefield. So, here's to Charlottesville. May it serve as a cautionary tale in the annals of American discourse. Because if we've learned anything, it's that when tempers flare, nobody wins. Except maybe the makers of body armor and tear gas, but let's not give them any more ideas. 9. Yellow Vest Protests, 2018. Picture this, it's 2018 in France, the land of baguettes, berets, and breathtaking protests. The French government, in its infinite wisdom, decided to jack up fuel prices. Now, in the States, we grumble about gas prices while filling up our SUVs. But in France, they do things a bit differently. Enter the yellow vests, named after those neon yellow safety vests everyone has to keep in their cars over there. What started as a simple, hey, these gas prices are killing us, quickly snowballed into a full-blown movement. It turns out the folks donning those yellow vests had a lot more on their minds than just fuel. They were fed up with economic inequality and felt like President Emmanuel Macron's policies were just making the rich richer and the poor poorer. In other words, they felt like they were getting the short end of the baguette. At first, the protests were pretty peaceful. People gathered, made some noise, and waved signs that probably had some clever French puns. But, as often happens when large groups of disgruntled people get together, things started to heat up. The peaceful demonstrations turned into chaotic scenes, with clashes between the protesters and the police. It wasn't long before parts of Paris looked like they were in the middle of a Hollywood disaster movie. Think overturned cars, smashed windows, and enough tear gas to make everyone's eyes water for weeks. The protests weren't just confined to Paris. They spread across France like a good brie on a baguette. And the message was clear. People were tired of feeling squeezed by rising living costs and what they saw as out-of-touch leadership. The movement was a wake-up call to the French government that perhaps they needed to pay a bit more attention to the everyday struggles of the common folk. Despite the chaos and the damage, the Yellow Vest movement did manage to get some results. The government scrapped the fuel tax hike and even introduced measures to help lower-income families. So, while it was a bumpy road, pun intended, the protests showed that when people band together and raise their voices, even in bright yellow vests, they can make a difference. In the end, the Yellow Vest protests were about more than just fuel prices. They were a vivid reminder that in a democracy, leaders can't afford to ignore the people's plight. And if they do, well, the people might just throw on some yellow vests and take to the streets to remind them who's boss. 10. Capitol Hill Riots, 2021. The Capitol Hill Riots of 2021. Picture this. It was a day that started off like any other slightly chaotic political event. Rallies, people waving signs, chanting slogans, and an air of general civic discontent. But then, things took a turn that nobody quite expected. It was as if the usual political drama decided to turn up the volume to 11, throw in some heavy metal, and bring along a mosh pit. So, this all began with a rally where folks were challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election. The atmosphere was charged, emotions were high, and the speeches were as fiery as a summer barbecue. Now, rallies are usually a space for people to express their opinions loudly and go home with sore throats, and maybe a few new conspiracy theories. But this one? It decided to make headlines in the most shocking way possible. As the day progressed, things escalated faster than a cat spotting a cucumber. Protesters started breaching the security barriers around the U.S. Capitol. You know, those barriers that are supposed to keep people out of highly important and sensitive areas? Yeah, those. They didn't just stop at breaking a few fences, though. They stormed right into the Capitol building itself. Imagine, if you will, a historic building with its grand halls and statues suddenly overrun by a mob. It's like someone threw a frat party in the middle of a history museum. Protesters were everywhere, some carrying flags, others taking selfies like they were on a particularly adventurous sightseeing tour. And the damage? Let's just say the cleaning crew had a lot more than just dust to deal with. In the midst of all this chaos, law enforcement was trying to regain control. There were clashes, scuffles, and a general sense of mayhem that felt like it was ripped straight from a disaster movie. And the most critical part, this whole brouhaha disrupted the certification of electoral votes. That's right, the very process that was supposed to formally acknowledge the new president's victory got put on hold because of this upheaval. The nation watched in stunned silence, disbelief painted across faces from coast to coast. It was a day that underscored deep political divides and left everyone with a lot to think about. And while history books will certainly have a lot to say about January 6th, 2021, for many, it will forever be remembered as the day American democracy got a very unexpected plot twist. Conclusion. While peaceful protests are essential for social change, they can sometimes spiral into unexpected chaos. Whether due to external forces, misunderstandings, or provocateurs, these incidents serve as reminders of the fragility of peaceful assemblies and the challenges of maintaining order in moments of unrest. Despite the chaos, these events often galvanize communities and ignite conversations that lead to meaningful change, illustrating both the power and unpredictability of collective action. Well, darlings, that's a wrap for today's delightful escapade. Here at Witworks Studios, we absolutely bask in the glow of your sharp minds and loyal hearts. If you're in the mood for some VIP treatment, unlimited access to our freshest podcasts, and a chance to support our artistic magic, why not glide over to our Premium Subscribers Club? You're brilliant, sweetheart. No need for directions. But before you head off to conquer the world with your new pearls of wisdom, I simply must give a heartfelt thank you to our fabulous friends at Gizmo League. These lovely folks are the real MVPs, bringing this podcast to life and sprinkling a little tech magic into your lives. So, if you're craving some gadget goodness, swing by www.gizmoleague.com and check out their latest wonders. Until we chat again, keep that curiosity burning bright and stay as marvelous as ever. See you next time, my lovelies.